hapus iawn. Happy St David's Day to all. And I please remind you all to switch your phones to silent for the duration of the meeting. In addition, can I refer you to the protocols for remote meetings which have been previously circulated? Namely, your microphones should be switched to mute unless you are speaking. The Democratic Services Officer will take a roll call at the start of this meeting of all members and officers. Should you wish to ask a question or make a comment, can you please indicate either via the chat function or by raising your electronic hand via Teams. I'll assume that you've all read the paperwork before us today prior to the meeting. When speaking, please would you introduce yourself. So I'm Councillor Del Morgan, Deputy Mayor. Jane, if you could please take the roll call.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'll mark you as present. Councillor Howard-Robry.
Present.
Councillor Bamsey.
Present.
Councillor Causey.
Present.
Councillor Clark.
Present.
Councillor Clement Williams.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Crowley.
Present, Jane. If I could just stop there and explain to the Mayor, I'm got a family funeral this afternoon. I'll stay as long as I can, but I have to leave during the meeting. I just wanted to flag that up before the start of the meeting. But I am present currently. Thank you, Jane.
Thanks, Matthew.
Councillor Stephanie Lynch. Councillor Lynch.
Present, yeah.
Councillor Arthur Davis.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Nicola Davis.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Oliver Davis.
Present, thank you, Jane.
Councillor Ros Davis.
Present, present.
Councillor Carlin Edwards.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Jamie Evans.
Present, diolch.
Councillor Shannon Freegard.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Charlotte Galsworthy.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Wyndham Griffiths.
Present, Jane, thank you.
Councillor Joe Hale.
Present, Jane. Thank you.
Councillor Sian Harris.
Present, thank you.
Councillor Mike Harvey.
Yeah, present, Jane.
Councillor Nigel Hunt. Councillor Nigel Hunt. Councillor Steve Hunt.
I am here, Jane.
Councillor Jeremy Hurley.
Present, thank you.
Councillor Chris James.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Hugh James.
Present, thank you, Jane.
Councillor Chris Jones.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Doreen Jones.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Hugh Jones.
Mr. Mayor, Jane, I've had a message from Councillor Hugh Jones. He is travelling and will be joining the meeting as soon as he possibly can.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jane Jones.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Leanne Jones.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Rob Jones.
Yes, here, Jane.
Councillor Scott Jones.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Dennis Keogh.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Simon Noyle.
I am here, thank you, Jane.
Councillor Ted Latham.
Yeah, present, Jane.
Councillor Dean Lewis.
Yes, I'm here, thank you, Jane.
Councillor Alan Llewellyn.
Present, Jane. Present.
Councillor Alan Lockyer.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Adam McGrath. Councillor McGrath. Councillor John Miller.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Sandra Miller.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Vivian Mason.
Jane, thank you.
Councillor Suzanne Paddison.
Present.
Councillor Sheila Penry.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Martin Peters.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Rebecca Phillips.
Present, present.
Councillor Mark Prothero.
I'm here, thanks, Jane.
Councillor Nep Purcell. Councillor Purcell.
Sorry, present. Thank you.
Councillor Sean Percy.
Present.
Councillor Saifra Harman.
I'm present, Jane.
Councillor Peter Rees.
I'm present, Jane.
Councillor Suzanne Renkes.
Present.
Councillor Sonia Reynolds.
Present.
Councillor Anthony Richards.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Peter Richards.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Marcia Spooner.
Present, Jane. Present.
Councillor Anthony Taylor.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Rachel Taylor.
Present.
Apologies from Councillor Warman, the Mayor. He has a mayoral engagement this afternoon. Councillor David Whitelock.
Present, thank you, Jane.
Councillor Chris Williams.
Present, thank you, Jane.
Councillor Annette Wingrave.
I'm here, Jane.
Councillor Rob Wood.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Alwyn Woolcock.
Presennol.
Can I just check, is Councillor Nigel Hunt present?
Jane, sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Yes,
that's what
I am. I'm in.
Oh,
Thank
right,
you.
there we
Right.
are. I
Lovely.
was trying to get in. Thank you. Just-
Thank you, that's great. I'll now go on to officers. Karen Jones.
Yes, I'm here.
Nicola P.S.
Yes, I'm present, Jane.
Andrew Thomas.
Present, Jane.
Andrew Jarrett.
Present, Jane.
Craig Griffiths.
Present, Jane.
Hugh Jones.
Present, Jane.
Karen Furlow.
Present, Jane.
Mike Shaw.
Yes, here, Jane, thank you.
Nicole Blackmore. Present, Jane. Stacey Curran.
Thank you.
Is there anybody that I haven't called the name out who is participating in today's meeting? Deputy Mayor, that's the roll call completed.
Diolch yn fawr. Agenda item 2, Mayor's announcements. I'm sure we're all today thinking, and our thoughts and prayers are very much with the good citizens of the Ukraine. I'm immediately going to call upon the Leader of Council to make a statement. Councillor Ted Latham, please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. On behalf of Neath Talbot County Borough Council, we condemn in the strongest possible terms the actions of Vladimir Putin and the Russian government, and express our dismay at the disregard for human life, national sovereignty, and the international rule of law. This council stands with the people of the Ukraine and their friends and relatives living in Neath Talbot, and we are ready to play our part in helping those who may be displaced from their homes. We express our unity and support for the democratically elected government and the people of the Ukraine. And we call on the UK government and our NATO allies to offer the maximum support for the Ukrainian people, including humanitarian aid and military support in line with treaties and international law. Thank you, Dale.
Thank you, Leader. I'd now like to call Councillor Arun Llywelyn, please.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, diolch yn fawr. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Ted Latham, the Leader of the Council, for the statement. I'm sure that all members will be supporting this statement, and I think that our community will also share the horror that we feel at the events unfolding day by day in Ukraine, and the bravery that we see of the Ukrainian people and also of the Russian people that have been willing to protest against the war, even though they have to brave such an oppressive regime. I welcome the commitment of Neath Talbot Council to help those in need, and I know that there are already voluntary efforts in our area to help the Ukrainian people. There are many issues that we will need to discuss. There are many lessons that we will need to learn, both here and across Europe. But for today and for now, our thoughts are with the Ukrainian people and any support that we are able to give them. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr. Can I now call Councillor Scott Jones, please?
You're on mute.
Councillor Jones, can we hear you?
Sorry, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I just want to endorse everything that's been said by our Leader of Council and Leader of Opposition, Councillor Llywelyn. Our thoughts tremendously are with the people of Ukraine, and I'd like to thank the leader for the joint statement that he's read out. Diolch yn fawr.
Move straight on, yeah. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr iawn y tri ohonoch chi. Thank you all three. Now, I only have one announcement for today's council. On a very much lighter note, I'd like to congratulate Councillor Angharad Aubrey and family on the birth of their little girl, Envis. Croeso i'r byd Envis fach. Congratulations, Angharad and family.
Thank you.
Yeah. Right, we'll move on to agenda item 3. Members' interests. Are there any interests to declare? If so, please indicate by raising your electronic hand via Teams or indicate via the chat function. And when called, state the details. The Democratic Services Officer will then forward an electronic version of the Declaration of Interest form for you to complete and email back to the officer.
I can only see one indication, Deputy Mayor. It's Councillor Mike Harvey.
Councillor Harvey, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Items 4, 5, 7 and 8 CCTV is mentioned, and items 4 and 5 the police are mentioned. I work for South Wales Police. Obviously, they got interest in CCTV. Obviously, they mentioned under those items, so say it is personal interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. There are no other interests being declared. Therefore, I'll now move on to agenda item 4. So this is the draft corporate plan 2022 to 2027. I'll call upon the leader of council to introduce the report, which has been commended to council from cabinet held yesterday on the 28th of February 2022. Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I am pleased to introduce this year's corporate plan. The plan summarises the very significant role this council has played during the COVID-19 pandemic. It also describes how the council will approach recovery and respond to key issues like climate change. Through our Let's Talk campaign, many people have shaped the priorities set out in the document, and our recent public consultation confirms broad support for the direction of travel. I therefore have no hesitation in commending the plan to council, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and will move the recommendation on page 11 when you are ready. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr. Members, are there any questions or comments? Please raise your electronic hand or indicate via the chat function, and I'll call upon you in turn. First of all, then, Cynghorydd Alun Llywelyn. Councillor Llywelyn, please.
Diolch, and thank you to the leader of the council for introducing the corporate plan. I think all members across the council have worked together on many of the themes in the corporate recovery plan. It is a reflection of the importance of council services in our communities and the role of local authorities in protecting people during the COVID period of the last 2 years, and the equally important role of councils in helping communities recover from the pandemic. As we know, there will be a new administration after the local government elections in May. We don't know who will form that administration. That is a democratic decision for local electors. But any new administration will be bound to review its priorities, to look at the balance of the needs of the valleys, the town centres, the coastal communities. And I'm sure that we'll have a lively debate over the next few weeks on the direction that we all want to take. But I'm also sure that the outline objectives that are in the plan before us today will stand us all in good stead. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Next is Councillor Sean Percy, please.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I just wanted to make, excuse me, I just wanted to make a brief comment, really, just to thank the Chief Executive, Karen, for taking the time to meet and come down to our wards and discuss with members some of the issues over the last sort of 12 months or so. We really appreciated that time, and seeing some of those conversations and themes reflected in the plan is obviously really lovely to see as well. And I just wanted to pick up just a couple of points that are of a particular interest to me, which is around heritage, tourism and culture, and just to particularly endorse some of the direction that's in the plan on those issues. Really pleased to see a strong a really strong emphasis on heritage and culture in the plan, and hopefully I'll be back here post May to see some of that through. So yeah, just a thank you then and an endorsement. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I see no further indications. Therefore, I'm now referring members to the recommendations on page 11 and the integrated impact assessment as Appendix 2 to the circulated report. Could I please have a proposer and seconder?
Happy to move, Mr. Mayor.
Seconder?
I second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Council, if you don't indicate to the contrary by raising your electronic hand, it will be assumed that you are in favour of the recommendations.
I can see no indications to the contrary, Deputy Mayor, so that item has been approved.
Thank you. Diolch yn fawr, Jane. Right, on to agenda item 5, the revenue budget 2022 to 2023. I'll start by calling Councillor Carol Clement-Williams, Cabinet Member for Finance, to introduce the report, which was commended to Council from Cabinet held yesterday. Councillor Clement-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You're on mute, Councillor. You're on.
Hello?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now, Councillor Clement-Williams.
Sorry, wrong. Mr. Mayor, Leader and members of Council. Setting our annual budget is one of the most important decision meetings for the Council every year. Today, Mr. Mayor, I'm delighted to propose what is a landmark budget. For the first time in the history of this Council, I am able to ask members of Council to approve actually freezing the Council tax. The budget proposals before Council today also contain increased annual investments in our essential services of over £14 million. More money for schools, social services and the visible services which our residents value so much. In addition, Mr. Mayor, the proposals include one-off investments of £2.8 million to help our residents recover from the COVID-19 global pandemic. Investments which will include improving the way our streets and neighbourhoods look, and also increased investment in youth services to help our young people who have suffered so much over the last 2 years. Mr. Mayor, I'm able to put these proposals before Council today, not only due to the generous Welsh Government settlement, but also because of the way this Council has prudently managed its finances through the period of austerity. Mr. Mayor, we have listened to what our residents have told us. Members, you will hear today, during today's Council meeting, that the independent group and Plaid Cymru, I believe, will table an amendment asking for a council tax reduction, even though the Council's Section 151 officer is warning against that. Then again, they've done that for the last 2 years. I look forward to seeing the fully costed proposal. I still haven't seen last year's, even though I have asked for it. And I would like to put on record, not just for this report, but for all the other finance reports, both today and throughout the year, that all our wonderful staff have the work, our wonderful staff have put into this budget every day, 365 days a year. Well, I might give them a day off for Christmas. It's a really groundbreaking budget, and I commend the recommendations to Council for approval. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Members, as usual, if there are any questions or comments, please raise your electronic hand or indicate via the chat function, and I'll call upon you in turn and refer questions to the Cabinet Member. Gynta gyd, first of all, Cynghorydd Alun Llywelyn, please.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Well, we sure know how to enjoy St David's Day. Who needs a bank holiday when we can set a budget? And indeed, there are many aspects to welcome in this budget, as it is the best settlement that Neath Talbot Council and other councils in Wales have received from Welsh Government over many years. And I'd like to thank the officers for all the work that they have invested in preparing the budget that's before us today. I am glad that Welsh Government has recognised the very significant role of local councils over the past 2 years in supporting people through COVID. And as we heard in the previous agenda item, councils will play a crucial part in the recovery of our communities. And the work of a local authority includes a huge range of services, from schools to social services, funding the fire and rescue, economic development and planning. And I'm glad that Neath Talbot Council eventually responded to the heartfelt and knowledgeable case put forward by the workers, unions and customers of Celtic Leisure to bring the service back in-house rather than outsourced to a private contractor. And this has the potential to greatly enhance the health and well-being of our residents and ensure security and fairness for our staff as we look forward. One of the best known phrases of St David's was "Gwnewch y pethau bychain," do the little things. And the council are also responsible for the things that make a difference to everyday lives of residents in all our communities, whether that is grass cutting, dealing with litter and dumping, combating dog mess, providing parks and amenities. One welcome aspect of the budget is reducing the sky-high charges for pest control. As we predicted as a Plaid group when the charges were hiked, it has contributed to a menace of rodent infestations. And it is often these frontline services that were continually cut during the years of austerity, affecting the look, feel and well-being of our towns, villages, countryside and the well-being of our people. At the same time, our council tax was continually high and rising. Since the creation of Neath Talbot Council in 1996, we have had one of the highest council taxes in Wales for over a quarter of a century, and it is currently the third highest. It is difficult to describe the frustration of our residents when they see this situation year after year where services declined, and especially now as we face a cost of living crisis. The recommendation in the report is to freeze the council tax for 1 year. The Plaid Cymru Group proposed last year to freeze the council tax, and the financial outcomes show that that would have been affordable and justifiable, and we could have helped people over the last year by doing so. Because the government settlement is better this year, we have a unique opportunity to begin to redress the balance by reducing the council tax, not just for this year, but for future years too. That could bring our council tax down to levels just that little bit closer to our neighbouring councils. Yesterday, I and other colleagues in the opposition groups asked the Cabinet to reconsider this issue and look again at reducing the council tax, but there has been no change in the recommendation. Therefore, at the appropriate time, we will propose an amendment to reduce the council tax by 2.75% for 22-23, which will bring the council tax back to the level that was achievable a year ago. Yesterday, we supported in principle the establishment of a £2 million hardship fund. We hope that will genuinely help many people or communities, but there were no details or criteria, what it will achieve or how many people will be helped. In contrast, we do know who will be helped by a reduction in the council tax. It is the vast majority of households across Neath Talbot. Council tax in our county is equivalent of a second mortgage for many people. And for residents that cannot access full council tax rebates, many are struggling day by day with the cost of living crisis while working hard to support their families. I urge all members across the council to support the amendment, reduce the council tax and make a real difference. Diolch.
Diolch yn fawr. Can I now please call upon Councillor Lynette Purcell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Before we began looking at the budget for this year, I had a look at my speech from March 2021, where Plaid requested a freeze on council tax but was ignored. Some of the reasons I gave last time for requesting any sort of relief on council tax were that if we did that, young couples with mortgages and young families who suddenly found that their income was devastated would have one less thing to worry about. I thought that as I represent a town centre with many independent businesses, local businesses would find customers had a little more disposable income available to invest in our local economy. I'm not an economist, but I have had a lot of advice from a friend who is an economist about the effect of putting money into the community by giving a little bit of money to everybody. We would also be showing that we are indeed a listening council. All those reasons remain. But when we asked for a freeze last year, and I asked the council to make an extraordinary gesture in these extraordinary times, the issues exercising all our minds was then just the ongoing problems caused by COVID. And if that was the situation now, I possibly would be minded to agree with the freeze on council tax. But no one in their wildest nightmares could have predicted the dire situation that we all find ourselves in now. So many crises have combined to create a perfect storm that is impacting drastically on the cost of living that is affecting absolutely everybody. I studied the report in detail, and your report does accept that, page 188, the need for support around delivering the food poverty agenda. Page 187, it accepts that many householders are currently experiencing a significant increase in their cost of living. Page 190 recognises an anticipation of increased risk being caused by the cessation of the Welsh Government's Hardship Fund in April 2022. And page 191 recognises an anticipation of increased risk being caused by the need to manage increased demand in social care. So this does imply that we are a listening council. And I had a look at the consultation. And before I make this comment, I sympathise wholeheartedly with every officer at any level who has tried to conduct a genuine consultation. We are told as a result of that consultation that the large majority supported the freeze on council tax. But this is a majority of the 485 people who responded. That's 485 of 141,000 members of this community, which is much less than 1% of the population that we are elected to represent. So how do we, as elected representatives, know what people are worrying about? What are they talking about? What do they feel aggrieved about? Whether we like it or not, they communicate through social media. We know that they are principally concerned about what they see as the unfair burden of Neath Talbot's excessively high council tax rate. The report actually acknowledges the response that there has been on social media. I don't know whether all of you read all the way through to the end of the report, but in Appendix 6 on page 231, I found the statement, the main issues raised via Facebook was the level of council tax in NPT. So this is what is concerning our residents. The integrated impact assessment on page 218 recognises the need to mitigate the impact of ongoing budgetary uncertainty. Well, I've come across some masterly understatements, but budgetary uncertainty at this present moment of time has got to be the ultimate understatement. None of us know what is happening from one day to the next. At whatever level we are functioning, even going to fill up our cars, we do not know until we get there what we are going to have to pay. The reserves that the council has available are often referred to as being for a much quoted rainy day. As I say, I am not an economist, but I've been convinced by people who can number crunch that our reserves are very, very healthy. I've just referred to the perfect storm that is breaking above our heads. We've recently experienced 3 meteorological storms in rapid succession. We know how much damage and suffering that caused. The storms that are affecting all our residents in their everyday lives, the effects of the pandemic, Brexit, welfare benefit reform, and the rising fuel and energy costs will and are impacting on all aspects of life, food costs, travelling to work, etc. for all residents. Now, we hear about this hardship fund, except we haven't heard about it because it's not in the report, but we gather that there is a hardship fund. And you cannot say that that is going to solve the problem. What I'm particularly concerned about is the struggling working families who don't come into any particular category that would enable them to benefit from this hardship fund. And we don't know what the criteria are anyway, because we haven't been told them. What I'm looking at is this large number of very hard-working families who are being squeezed left, right and centre. If our healthy reserves are indeed being saved for a rainy day, and this storm is breaking over our heads as we speak, then I beg the Council for once to have the vision and courage to make a bold step towards improving the lives of all its residents. And finally, with your indulgence, Mr. Mayor, I'm coming to the end of 14 years in this chamber, whether real or virtual. I've got to know many colleagues in all parties and have appreciated their integrity. I'm inviting those of whatever party who know that this is the right thing to do for their residents who have elected them to have the courage to vote in support of the amendment when it's proposed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Diolch yn fawr. The next speaker will be Councillor Suzanne Paddison, please. Suzanne.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If we were to vote for the amendment which is being proposed today by opposition parties, we would have to go against the advice of Hugh Jones, our 151 officer. And before we come to a vote, bearing in mind what Lynette has just said, I would like to ask Councillor Llewellyn and Councillor Jones, and if they will reply, I'm not sure, who do you expect to benefit most from a reduction in the council tax, and why should we vote for that amendment? Thank you.
I'm going to call next Councillor Scott Jones, please. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and I'm sure my statement will touch upon Councillor Paddison's question. Mr. Deputy Mayor, with your indulgence and at the appropriate time, I can confirm on behalf of myself and the Independent Democratic Group that we will be supporting and seconding the amendment before us today. Mr. Deputy Mayor, the Welsh Government has provided, as outlined earlier by the Honourable Cabinet Member, the best settlement we've received for many years, which when added to additional payments due to COVID, has resulted in a possible 6 million underspend and has kept reserves at a similar level where they were prior to the pandemic. The last 2 years have been by far the worst for many generations for residents across our county borough. And therefore, our Independent Democratic Group believe that at this time, we should do all that we can to reduce council tax and reduce the financial burden on people's pockets across Neath Talbot. I agree that the hardship fund to be set up will go somewhat way to help some of our most vulnerable. However, the amendment before us today for a reduction in council tax will support every household across the county borough, with the exception, of course, to those who are already in receipt of 100% reduction. We believe this proposal is fully fundable. I've worked with our Treasurer, the Director of Finance, in terms of meetings and email exchanges since October. And I believe, and we believe, that this wouldn't have a detrimental effect on any of the frontline services within the forthcoming financial year. And I believe it'll be the role of any new council administration after May to determine future levels of council tax going forward. It is therefore also believed that with the hardship households currently face with increases to cost of living, assistance by way of council tax reduction is needed now. Most households in Wales will receive an £150 payment from the Welsh Government as part of plans to tackle the rising cost of living. We believe there is an opportunity for us here within Neath Talbot to go that extra mile further by way of a council tax reduction for the people of Neath Talbot. Therefore, Mr Deputy Mayor, at the appropriate time, I would be happy to support and second the amendment. Thanks very much.
Diolch, sir. Thank you. Next speaker will be Councillor Steve Hunt, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Deputy Mayor, I should say. Can I firstly thank all the officers for the reports we have in front of us today, as a lot of the important work goes into preparation and delivering such detailed reports. It has to be said that today's budget is one of the best, if not the best budget delivered by Neath Talbot Council ever, certainly since I have been a councillor, as the Cabinet Member for Finance has indicated. However, can we go further, given our current financial position? Hugh Jones, Head of Finance, has admitted we can afford to do more, but it wouldn't be prudent at this budget setting today. We know that for a very long time people have had to choose between heating and eating. This year, they won't have to choose, because the cost of heating will double in 2022. Potentially, this could be the year of hypothermia. Inflation is also at an all-time high, highest for 30 years. Wage increases are not enough to combat the cost of living crisis that we are in. And for those out of work, it's going to be a huge problem as we go forward into 2022. Food banks have already seen referrals doubled, and make no mistake, that will be on the increase. Those on low or medium wages, just over the threshold of having any council tax benefit help or relief, will also struggle the most to pay their council tax bills. We need to do more for the full council taxpayer. This group of taxpayers contribute an awful lot to the economy across Neath and Port Talbot County Borough Council. We need to help anyone struggling here in Neath Port Talbot as much as possible. So I certainly welcome the proposed hardship fund and look forward to seeing how that will be implemented over the coming months to help those most in need. However, council tax is something we can support those families and business owners who would not necessarily qualify for a hardship fund, but are on the threshold, as I have already indicated, of not receiving any council tax benefit. They also need help and support so they do not get into financial difficulties. We simply must include the percentage of the council taxpayer when delivering budgets going forward. So a proposal of a 0% freeze this financial year, whilst is welcome from previous years, but I believe we can and should go further, as we have seen council tax rises in Neath Port Talbot Council every year for over a decade, and they have gone up by over 40%, keeping Neath Port Talbot Council, Borough Council, the third highest council taxpayer in the whole of Wales. So we need to address this problem and start to bring down the unwanted position here at this county borough. I believe all parties and groups should look at putting the council tax element of the budget at the top of their priorities going forward and take every opportunity when possible to keep lowering the figure year on year if possible, without affecting jobs and services, of course. The good Welsh Government settlement plus an underspend currently at 6 million, and this is expected to rise as stated by the Cabinet Member for Finance, coupled with very strong reserves and remembering the extra £12 million we received from Welsh Government a couple of months after last year's budget setting. Also listening to our head of financial, Hugh Jones, where general reserves should be 4% of our revenue budget and our current levels at 6.3 of our revenue budget. We have 20 million in general reserves and 51 million in specific reserves currently. This will allow us to meet the 2.75 reduction in council tax today. The last 2 years have been the toughest for everyone, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Businesses, homeowners, individuals have lost loved ones and also lost their businesses and jobs. Many people will need support now, not in weeks or months to come, as the hardship fund will possibly deliver on. Mental health is also on the increase, so we can do something for all our constituents together as a council. Then I'm sure that they would welcome the support as a united council, showing them at this time. I have been a councillor since 2008, and every leader at the authority has also stated at these meetings that our reserves are there for a rainy day. It's ironic, really, as we've had 4 storms recently. However, how do we define a rainy day? As I mentioned, inflation the highest for 30 years, energy prices doubling, 2 years of a pandemic, and wages rising well below inflation. So even if our reserve needed to be used, can we afford this reduction in council tax at this moment in time? Yes, we most certainly can, for all the reasons given by my fellow councillors, and I will be supporting the amendment this afternoon for the reasons I have already given. So, Mr. Deputy Mayor, whilst this is a good budget as far as services, job protection and a hardship fund with a 0% council tax freeze, it's fair to say that over the past 10 years, as I have indicated, the increases of 40% in council tax bills by this Labour administration. So by putting a 0% freeze this year simply doesn't go far enough, in my opinion. And I will finish with a few notes that I had put down. I also feel that any administration that comes into effect May 2022 should consider a council tax reserve pot. That when and if Neath Talbot Council can afford to put money into that reserve pot, they should, so that they can continue to address the unwanted position of being the 3rd highest council taxpayer in Wales. Unison, the unions, I'm sure you are aware, their statement, the budget sentiment from Welsh Government is better than predicted for Neath Talbot due to the continuous campaigning of Unison Neath Talbot branch, which will put our council in a strong position to meet the needs of our communities, with further positive settlements being predicted for 2023-2024 and 2024-2025. And as already been stated, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I will finish now. The Welsh Government have also recognised the cost of living crisis by putting forward £150 to various bands of council taxpayers. So I would ask every member today to support the amendment to this year's budget by putting forward, that was put forward, sorry, by Plaid Cymru Group and supported by the Independent Democratic Group. Let's do the right thing today, members, and support the amendment put before Council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Next, can I call upon Councillor Simon Noyle, please?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Del, thank you. A lot of what I will say will probably be a duplication of what many of my fellow councillors have said here today. But some things were mentioned yesterday, which were discussed, and I want to get them out into the open for those who were not in attendance yesterday. Thank you to Hugh and his staff for producing the budget, and obviously it's one of the better ones that we've had for quite some time. In terms of the recommendation put in front of us today, I feel at this time we should be doing all we can for as many people as we can. Interestingly, at yesterday's cabinet scrutiny, I asked the Section 151 officer how the level of reserves projected at the end of March 2022 compared to those in March 2020 pre-pandemic, who kindly came back to me with the precise figures last night. He stated the closing balance at the 31st of March 2020 was 20.8 million, and the projected closing balance for the 31st of March 2022 was 19.9 million. I remember vividly the leader at that time telling me that we needed to keep our reserves high just before we went into the lockdown in March 2020 to make sure that we helped as best we could if we needed to use those reserves. Personally, I don't think we can use the fact of a huge event such as COVID having a massive impact on our level of reserves. Clearly, during the last 2 years, the Welsh Government has provided additional funding to assist local authorities such as ours. We must consider that the Section 151 officer has confirmed that he is happy that the level of our general reserves should not drop lower than 4%. This equates to approximately 12.5 million. The Section 151 officer has also confirmed that it is his recommendation or choice not to use the reserves to drop the level of council tax in this instance. I believe he confirmed yesterday, however, that it was affordable, but his recommendation at this time was not to do it. It was agreed by Cabinet scrutiny yesterday to allow a figure of £2.3 million from the underspend in 21-22 to be set aside as a specific reserve to be used to develop a range of measures to support those who are hardest hit by the cost of the living crisis. I fully support that, but we have no detail behind it. No details about exactly who, why, where or what will be affected by this new scheme. Conversely, a reduction in the council tax levy we know will affect everyone, and every household that pays council tax, we can easily quantify the number of people that this will have an impact on. Listening to the reasoning given yesterday why the scheme was proposed, bearing in mind that it was not proposed until Friday the 25th of February, last Friday, almost 1 week after we had heard from Hugh in the seminar regarding the potential underspend. And in fact, my colleagues had already received confirmation from Hugh as to what he was forecasting several weeks and months ago. The timing of announcing this scheme and the lack of detail behind it screams of it being perhaps a knee-jerk reaction to something that was put in the public domain last week. We're in a position where the Section 151 officer recommends to us things which at this stage he must do so to protect the next administration in May. I fully understand and
You're on mute, Simon.
Councillor Noel is on mute, I think, or lost
I'm
connection.
sorry. I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I'll just go back a little bit then. We're in a position where the Section 151 officer recommends to us things which at this stage he must do so to protect the next administration in May. I fully understand and agree with that. But with a better than expected settlement, more and additional payments to cover COVID and the underspends due to other internal factors, we should, as a council, try to do as much as we possibly can for as many people as we can. We have heard that any costs attributable to the Celtic Leisure Services coming back in-house will not be realised during this next financial year, and the Cabinet Member for Finance stated in a recent meeting that she would be looking to use reserves to offset any potential additional costs when they are realised. Therefore, this does not have an immediate impact on our pressures. We are happy to set aside £2.3 million for a hardship fund, but with no detail behind it. Looking at that compared to a tangible and identifiable benefit from the reduction in council tax, it is not even comparable. With everything that you have heard today, I urge members to vote as they see fit, but if the desire is not there to agree with the amendment put forward by Councillor Llewellyn, which I will be supporting today, to propose further amendment, I propose they suggest a further amendment to the 0% proposal. go some way to supporting all those who pay council tax. We can afford it. Offer a 0.51 or a 1.5 reduction today, and it will show that actually all sides of this council can work together and agree on a figure which is in the best interests of many and not just a few. And there we are, not just a few. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Diolch yn fawr, thank you. Next, can I please call Councillor Nigel Hunt?
Thank you, Chair. I feel privileged today to speak in what is the most important council meeting of the year, where members make the most significant decision in the council calendar. The ratepayers of Neath Talbot live in a beautiful and diverse county with wonderful communities in the north, the south, the east, the west, and of course in amongst it, God's favourite acres in Aberafon and Baglan Moors. The past 12 months have seen our residents face unprecedented challenges. Council tax increases, vaccines, restrictions, increasing energy bills, inflation, wars in Europe, scandals, school closures, and the impact of Brexit, where European money has been replaced by the Levelling Up Fund, which of course Neath Talbot was overlooked. The council taxpayer of Neath Talbot are enduring hard times, and this is an opportunity to show prudence and compassion and ease the financial burden and pressure that they face. The council taxpayer of Neath Talbot pay more in council tax than all its neighbours in Bridgend, Carmarthenshire, Powys, Rhondda Cynon Taf and Swansea. Year on year, we increase that council tax setting. We have the third highest council tax in Wales, one of the highest in Wales and England. How do we justify this when we continue to hold an excessive level of general reserve? We hold the highest level of general reserves in all of Wales, higher than Cardiff, higher than Swansea, Newport, Rhondda Cynon Taf, all our neighbours, we hold higher. We have the generous Welsh Government settlement, and in last year's budget setting, and on top of this, and in last year's budget setting, in the time of the pandemic, the Plaid Cymru Group, with the support of the Liberal Democrat and the Propel member, proposed a council tax freeze, and it was prudent, robust, comparative, and that proposal has aged very, very well. The proposal we have in front of us today is for a council tax freeze, what we proposed last year. We don't think that this goes far enough. A 2.75% cut is affordable, it's justifiable, it's sustainable, and we have sufficient resources to carry out high quality services within the council. It will take us back to the level of 2021. We will still, the council taxpayers of Neath Talbot will still pay more than those in Bridgend, Rhondda Cynon Taf, Powys, all our neighbours. We will still pay more with this cut. We still have to do more. And if it wasn't for Hugh's advice, frankly, we would have gone for a bigger cut. But we have listened to Hugh because he seems a very frugal and he seems a very competent officer. And so we are looking at his medium-term plan, and that's why we've only kept it at 2.75%. A 2.75% cut means that we will take 1.66 million out of our general reserve. Who has informed us that we will still have £18.4 million in our general reserve. The last table I could find for Welsh councils, the nearest to that is 15 million. We will still have £18 million. So, as we said, this is very justifiable, it's sustainable, and we will be closing the gap for our council taxpayers. So people in Margam will be paying closer to what they pay in Pyle. People in Gwynfi will be paying closer to what they pay in Treorchy. People in Neath will be paying closer to what they paid in Powys, and vice versa. Sgwyn will get closer to Llansamlet. I urge everyone today to consider our proposal. It's compassionate and it is prudent, it is sustainable. And it gives the ratepayers of Neath Talbot better value for money. So I do urge everyone to vote for this amendment. Thank you very much.
Diolch yn fawr, thank you. I now call please upon Councillor Rob Jones.
Diolch, Mr Deputy Mayor. Like many of my colleagues that sit in this virtual chamber, I have been here now 10 years, and I yet again am disappointed by the rhetoric that I constantly hear from speakers. Suffice to say, a history lesson is required in the formation of Neath Talbot going back to 1996, where the unbalanced liability of debt shared between Swansea Council and Neath Talbot over West Glamorgan's dissolvement gave us a 60-40 split, and ever since then we've been playing catch-up. And hence, over the years, the strategic policy has been to increase council tax between the revenue support grant and statutory assessment of spend. However, one speaker mentioned that year on year the policy should be to reduce the increase of council tax, which has been done in the last 10 years. And we continue to do that as a Labour Party. I often think when people come forward with suggestions in relation to how we're going to put the wrongs right, one mention of a council tax pot. Well, where has that been for the last 10 years? Why hasn't that been proposed? These amendments come forward the day before the council budget set in. Where has it been for the last year? Working on, collaborating with, and every year we find that it's always a knee-jerk reaction to what is being proposed. If I was Hugh Jones, I would take exception to the fact of being called a seemingly competent officer. He was a very competent officer, extremely wealthy in his knowledge, as was his predecessor. And to take advice from a Section 151 officer, those that don't need the caution of listening to what they have to say. What is not being taken into calculation here, and we've heard about the storm and rainy day. At the beginning of the pandemic, this council, in order to pay the £10,000 and £25,000 grants to individual premises, borrowed £20 million. So there would be no delay in relation to that payment going out to the community. And that was a brave and bold decision that this council took in order to support the people within our community. What also isn't being said here is that year on year, there have been calls from the opposition that if we'd have set the council tax at 100% increase, that council tax would have been asked to be set at a 50, 90, 40 or whatever figure you want to pluck out of the air, because they just wanted to be seen to be doing the little things, as Councillor Llewellyn said, but there is also a quote here to do the right things. And it is easy to do the little things. It's harder to do the right things and the moral things. And yes, we have been a listening council and we continue to be a listening council. And I find it ironic that stats are produced in this meeting, which seems to be given so much importance to members of the opposition, when in fact it's decried in one area and supported in another. And if we all listen to the comments on social media, well, we'd all be better educated, because obviously social media is a double-edged sword. But if we listen to the opposition over the last 10 years, we in fact would be £7 million down in our reserves, because they've called to extricate monies from those reserves from the very first council tax budget setting meeting that I attended, when £2 million was being asked to be devolved to education because we had a surplus of that year. And it has continued over the last 10 years to ask for either council tax reduction or to remove reserves. And that, in a rough guess calculated, would be around £7 million. £7 million that, if we acceded to those requests, would not be in the reserves now. So yes, we are a listening council. And yes, we do the right things. And don't forget, for those that have mentioned about business rates, we have no control over business rates whatsoever in any way, shape or form. But I will not be supporting this amendment. I think it's foolish. We are doing the very best that we can with the resources that we have got. And what concerns me, and I would be delighted to hear from any member of the opposition, what cognizance and costings have you actually done in the cross-party decision to bring Celtic Leisure back in-house in relation to this? Because whilst there is a suggestion that this may not take place this year, it is a suggestion. What if that proposal actually comes to fruition in the next 6 months or 9 months or before the end of this financial year and costs this authority money that we won't have if we accede to this amendment? So, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I disagree with the opposition's collusion in relation to the joint social media statements that have been put out in order to again attack this very prudent council in relation to its fiscal policy that has been here for the last 10 years. And I will not be supporting this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Can I call upon Councillor Dean Causey, please?
Diolch, Mr Deputy Mayor. Forgive me for putting him on the spot, but I wondered if Hugh could provide us with the detail of what this would actually mean. So what a cut in of 2.75 would mean to a Band B ratepayer, then someone who pays full rates, because I think Band B would be far more representative of the homes and the ratepayers across our county borough. I am no accountant or mathematician, but from my very cursory workings out at a Band D, it looks to me like for the main it would be around about £40 a year, which is less than £1 a week. Now, of course, nobody likes paying council tax, and I am absolutely supportive of being able to trying to save people money, as much as we can. And I know personally, like everybody else in this chamber, would be doing so, working with communities and constituents to do that via the various means, via welfare rights and everything else. However, we all come to politics with a set of views and values and principles. And for myself, I'm a great believer in the old saying, from each according to the needs, from each according to their means, to each according to their needs, and that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And I think when I sit down and consider the difference that this council can make when we have almost £7 million to deliver services, which is what the council is all about at the end of the day, or by giving people, some of which clearly may not need it, an extra £1 or so a week. I think I know which side of the fence I sit on. So it would be good to have those details, because I think sometimes we can get wrapped up in percentages, we can get wrapped up in these overall figures. But what would it actually mean to the average ratepayer across this county borough? I think it is important. It is important to set it out in this meeting, and it is important to set it out for our constituents, so that people can actually weigh up then, what am I going to get in return? Because it's a trick that is played upon us time and time again by Tories, where they give us a tax break, might give us a couple £100 in our pockets, but the services that are cut are immeasurable. And they're services that we take for granted often, and we don't realise what we've got until we've lost them. And it's very, very important. And yes, it is absolutely services for those who are most vulnerable. It is social care. it is social services, but it's also the parks that we run, the refuse collections that we oversee, the roads, the lights, and everything else that goes with it. People take for granted, and when we start cutting these things, people start noticing. And I, like I say, I know which side of the fence I sit on in terms of the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
I call upon the finance response to that question first, then, please.
Thank you, Councillor Causey, for putting me on the spot. Just a quick flick through my spreadsheets shows that the difference per annum for a Band D property would be £45.65. You asked for a per week figures, that would be 86 pence per week. And you specifically asked about a Band B property, and that would be £35.51. So that would be 68 pence a week. So I hope that gives you a factual answer to your question. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, Hugh. Thank you.
That's tremendous. Thank you very much, Hugh. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Can I call upon Councillor Steve Hunt again, please? And can I ask if members are coming back for a second or subsequent?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Appreciate you allowing me to come back. Can I just say, you know, it's probably moving into a debate outside of perhaps the remit, but it's all concise and important. Can I just, Councillor Causey brought up a figure and asked for those figures, but that's an awful lot of money to families, hardworking families, when the money as it is today is stretched, looking for the extra pound in their pocket. So you know, that's quite a lot of money. And can I just say, the previous leader, Councillor Jones, when he was speaking there, I've said before when he was leading and so forth that there's choices, and as I said at the beginning of my speech today, it's about choices. I have to respect the Labour's proposals and the choices they make it, but I would ask them to also respect the choices by other members, whether it's individually or by groups or parties. And the last thing I would say, I certainly will not take no morality advice from Councillor Jones whatsoever. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Llywelyn, eto, please.
Yeah, diolch, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Dwffair, and I don't know, mae nifer o aelodau wedi gofyn i ateb cwestiynau. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. A number of members have asked me questions, which I'd like to answer. And first of all, Councillor Rob Jones, we'll go reverse order, as they say. Councillor Rob Jones said we need a history lesson, but I have a degree in history, but I know when we need to look to the future. And that's what we're trying to do here today. Now, Councillor Clement Williams, the Cabinet Finance spokesperson, asked how we would afford our proposal. Well, our proposal would leave reserves, general reserves in this authority of £18.4 million plus, the highest in Wales. And I think that answers the question as to whether this proposal is affordable. And we're not making it up as we go along, as you know, like some announcements at the end of last week. Now, Suzanne asked me who would benefit the most. And I think that's a fair question. And I think the answer is that it will be those that we all speak to every day. The families who work hard, often juggling more than one job to make ends meet. Many of them work for our authority. I was speaking to several of them after hours in our local school last night, juggling several jobs. They would be helped. Others are self-employed or running small businesses that have been incredibly squeezed over the past 2 years during the pandemic period. There are people who pay rent or mortgages. They have children in schools or hoping to go to university. They may not be receiving full council tax rebate, but they are being squeezed from every direction. These are the people who would benefit most from our proposal to reduce the council tax, and they're people who we should support the most, the mechanisms that we have. It is a time to be prudent, but I think this proposal is prudent. It would leave us with the highest general reserves in Wales on current calculations. So yes, it is a time to be prudent, but it is also time to be brave. And we hope everybody will support that amendment. Diolch.
Diolch yn fawr. Next, Councillor Doreen Jones, please.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. I was going to keep quiet, but listening to some of the things that have been said so far, I think we've all forgotten that we've survived 10 years of austerity, and we've forgotten as well that one of the reasons I've been on, like some of you, I've been here since 2008, and I know how much that we were taking out of reserves to keep a steady budget over those years, right? And not only that, but we've dealt with austerity, we've dealt with 2 years of COVID, and now we've got the price rises. And don't forget, the utility prices, the electric, the gas, the petrol, and all those things are going to have a deep impact on the council itself. You know, you can't just go through it. I think some of your ideas, yes, in a perfect world, wonderful. But we don't live in a perfect world, unfortunately, and we have to be realistic. We've had cutbacks on library services, community centres have gone over where you haven't got them with community councils. In Talbot in particular, the community councils have gone over to the voluntary sector, the communities running them themselves. We've lost a lot of services. We've also lost a lot of staff over the past few years. So whilst you know, I can't possibly support the amendment. It's all pie in the sky, wonderful, and it's all political, quite frankly. And thank God, I really do feel very strongly that it's just a political gag, just for, we are coming up to the funny season now, and it's going to be that. So sorry, I can't not support. I will be supporting the recommendation.
Thank you. Now, just to repeat, if members are coming back in for the second time, can I please ask you to be very, very brief and introduce new items rather than go over previous items. So next one I have is Councillor Nigel Hunt again, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I don't think it's pie in the sky. We have still got the highest general reserve in Wales. We're not going to be cutting any services. We are cutting from our excessive general reserve to give out taxpayers in Neath Talbot better value for money. Our Chief Finance Officer has laid out in his medium-term plan that we are going to reduce our general reserve down to 4% of our net revenue expenditure. That will be something along the lines of 13.5 million. We're going to do that over the next 4 years. This has hardly any incremental effect on that medium-term plan. And we're on 18.4 million. We haven't actually accounted for the unplanned movements in our reserve, which will surely come about like they do every year. Who has sent me the data for the last 3 years? It's around about £1 million on average. So, you know, and this year has been an exceptional year. So we can expect it to be at over £19 million come March the 31st. So this really isn't pie in the sky. This is forward thinking. This is where this council should be going. Our council taxpayers in Neath Talbot should be having parity with those in other counties. For far too long, we've had leaders of this council that have just wanted to push us up, up, up. Thank you very much.
Sure. Can I call on Councillor Sean Percy now, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I've been called in at a good time actually, because the there's a lot of statistics and figures being bandied about in today's meeting, being used as justification and an explanation. But Councillor Hunt's just made a point now about the proposal would have. He's made a comment. It'll have very little impact on the medium-term financial strategy, which is quite a bold statement to make, actually, because if you break down the figures, Hugh's advice in terms of general reserves going down to 4% effectively frees up about £7 million of reserves to be spent over the medium-term financial plan period. The proposal in front of us today is to take 1.6 million out of that reserve this year, which is 20% of the reserves available over the medium-term financial strategy. That is not an insignificant amount. That's 20% of the medium-term financial strategy reserves this year. And that is without taking into account the key point in what I'm trying to say, which is members, again, are trying to suggest a decision like this can be taken without consequences in future years. It is completely misleading to make that suggestion. It was misleading last year, it's misleading this year. There's a material change in circumstances from the council tax freeze proposed last year, which again was proposed to be propped up by reserves, which have an ongoing impact. The following year, you have to find that money from reserves or cut your budget. The council tax freeze this year is proposed from an increase in Welsh Government funding. So next year, that increase is in the base budget. So we don't have to scramble around next year to find that money. So there's a really significant and material difference in the circumstances from the proposed freeze last year and the freeze this year. And yet again, we have a very similar proposal, which is a reduction this year, underpinned by reserves, and no explanation whatsoever from the opposition, no honesty in terms of how that will impact future year budgets whatsoever. So we've talked about 1.6 million coming out of that reserve fund, 20%. So the question is, what do we do next year? What does the budget look like for next year? Now, interestingly, and unusually, we've got a forward look of what our settlement will be next year. And we know next year that our settlement is not going to be as generous. So we've already got a pressure in the budget next year. We know our increase, I think the anticipated increase is about 2.5%. That probably won't even keep pace with inflation. So we've got Celtic leisure pressures in terms of the budget following next year. We've got a known smaller increase in council tax in our income from Welsh Government, and we'll have a 1.6 million hole in the budget from this proposal. So we could take that out of reserves again. Wonderful. So we've now taken 40% of the medium-term financial plan reserves out. And we can't carry on doing that. The advice actually given to us by Hugh and the comments made was that the medium-term financial plan and the reserves unlocked by his change of advice would be used to deliver the corporate plan priorities over that medium-term financial plan. So part of that is to deal with increases and decreases in settlements from Welsh Government, which we know is going to be less next year. Part of that is to deliver council priorities. And this proposal is just, it's not taking into account any of those issues whatsoever. The advice we had, the let's talk priorities, the corporate plan does not account for spending 20% of the reserves available, extra reserves, and I completely accept we have reserves over and above the level that we require, and we all accept that. We all accept that advice from Hugh. We've accepted that they would be used to support the medium-term financial plan, which is yet to be ratified, which will be based upon the corporate priorities and the corporate plan, which we've already looked at today. So this is going against our strategy, going against our plan. There's no indication from the opposition what we will do next year. It'd be really interesting what you're proposing to do next year. Is it to use all of that reserve? And let's not deliver any of our corporate plan priorities. Let's just use all that reserve, and then what do we do? Do we hike council tax then, or what services do we cut? It's not sustainable. There's no long-term information being given whatsoever. So I want to make one last point, just in terms of statistics again. We've had you know, we're getting the figures banded around for Band D council taxpayers in comparison to our neighbouring authorities. It is worth pointing out that the average council taxpayer in Neath Talbot, the average council taxpayer, pays less than Swansea, pays less than Bridgend. If you compare Band D, the average council taxpayer is different, but we have a far less Band D properties in Neath Talbot. The average Neath Talbot resident pays less than Bridgend. The average Neath Talbot resident pays less than Swansea. So we need to be very careful on how we use those figures. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Right, colleagues, we are 1 hour, 20 minutes into the meeting, and I'm taking it from the chair that this particular item has been debated now to the extent that members will know how they wish to vote. So I'm inclined not to call members back in again. I think I'll call Councillor Alan Llewellyn, who has indicated that he wishes to put an amendment before council. So I call Councillor Alan Llewellyn in now, and then I will hand over to Craig Griffiths to run the procedure thereafter. Cynghorydd Llewellyn, sgwelwch yn dda?
Mr. Deputy Mayor, if I may, on a point of order, surely
point of order, yes.
The Cabinet Member for Finance will be allowed to sum up before we go to any vote.
I understand.
I've raised my hand and I haven't spoken in the 1 hour and 20 minutes that you refer to.
Quite correctly, I saw your hand up after I started speaking, but my understanding is that Cabinet Member and indeed yourself would be able to address the amendment before it's put to the vote.
Okay, all right. All right, sorry, go on.
I just call Councillor Llewellyn to put the amendment formally, and then we can deal with that. Councillor Llewellyn, sgwelwch yn dda?
Yeah, diolch yn fawr iawn, Dwbyfair. And if I could ask your guidance, obviously it's a fairly lengthy amendment because it ties into the recommendation that was previously published. I'm willing to read it out word by word, but otherwise, Mr. Mayor, I am happy to put forward the salient points of the amendment. I'll take your guidance on that.
I think Craig Griffiths will explain how members are going to be able to be guided through not only the process, but to know what the amendment in its entirety actually says. Craig?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So what I would suggest, Councillor Llewellyn, is if you could give a short indication at this stage about what the amendment is you wish to propose. Following that, then we can allow the Cabinet Member Rogid, if they wish to come in with any comments, ultimately for members to consider. And then once they've spoken, I'll come back then to members and I'll take you through the process of how we officially put the recommendation and your amendment at that point, and we'll take it nice and slowly at that process. So if you just give an overview at this stage about what you're suggesting, that's fine by me. Yes,
thanks very much for that guidance, and I won't repeat anything that's said before. It's been a good and lengthy debate. It is proposed that instead of a council tax freeze, a reduction in the sum of 2.75% is set, with the additional amount to produce a balanced budget being met from the general reserve, representing a sum of 1.669 million to be taken for 2022-23, and the relevant part of the amendment to implement that would be recommendation 4 in relation to the setting of the council tax levels for 2022-23. Councillor asked to approve that the 2022-23 Band D equivalent for Neath Talbot County Borough Council will be £1,614.37, and that there shall be a 2.75% reduction in council tax as opposed to a freeze as detailed in the report, with a gap of 2.75% being funded from the general reserves, representing a sum of 1.669 million to be taken for 2022-2023. So it's basically recommending an amendment that will reduce the council tax recommendation by 2.7%. Thank you.
And a formal seconding of the motion, of the amendment, please.
I second, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, right. We'll come back to Craig Griffiths firstly.
Just before we take that amendment through the process, Deputy Mayor, what I would suggest is the Cabinet Member wanted to come back to give a comment with regards to what the amendment has been proposed for members to consider. Once the Cabinet Member or leader has spoken, I'll then come back in and I can take members through the process at the next stage.
We would both like to speak, Mr. Mayor, if possible, please. If you can ask the leader first.
Yes, indeed. Leader, first of all, then, please, Ted.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and I'll be very, very brief. As Alan have said, it's been a very long but healthy debate, and one which I'm sure we're all grateful for. I just want to make a couple of comments, Mr. Mayor, picking up on the general theme since we started this meeting at 2 o'clock. There seems to be a little bit of confusion around as to exactly who will benefit from the proposal that Councillor Llewellyn has put forward. I think Councillor Paddison said that the cost, beg your pardon, Councillor Purcell said that the cost of living is affecting everyone. Councillor Simon Noyle said we must do all we can for as many people as we can. And yet that was confused by Councillor Stephen Hunt saying that this proposal would benefit the full council taxpayers of Neath Talbot. Well, it's either benefiting everyone or it's just benefiting the full council taxpayers of Neath Talbot. A little bit of confusion over that, and one that hasn't been clarified by the proposal that's been put forward. Councillor Nigel Hunt and Councillor Llewellyn have said about the it's going to cost £1 million over the next 12 months. And clarify up by saying that this was a medium to long-term proposal. Well, if it's a medium to long-term proposal, the cost of this proposal that you were putting forward is going to be £8.34 million over the next 5 years. Could I just ask the question, where is that money coming from? I really just don't understand. So I'm afraid, as far as I'm concerned, it's riddled with confusion. There's no consistency in it. All speakers have praised the ability of Mr. Hugh Jones and praised the professionalism of Mr. Hugh Jones. And Mr. Hugh Jones does not support what is being proposed this afternoon. I'll hand over now to my Cabinet colleague to sum up in more detail, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much.
Councillor Clement Williams, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I can just find my... Sorry. Okay. Right. So for 3 years now, we have taken advice from the Section 151 officer, whichever one that may be, and set an affordable, prudent and sustainable budget. They are the things that we have to, or the Section 151 officer has to ensure when we're setting council tax. The opposition parties have come up with an alternative proposal, slightly less than we have during 3 consecutive council budget setting meetings. See a bit of a pattern here. They decided to go against the recommendations of the Section 151 officers. What they've consistently done is show that they simply do not seem to have grasped the prudent and sustainable bits of council tax setting, or they wouldn't be proposing their motion today to lower council tax. The total loss, as the leader has just mentioned, to the council accumulatively over 5 years is 8.345 million. And as the leader has touched on as well, he was already said he doesn't support this. So we would have a budget gap of 8.345 million, but nobody has mentioned how they're going to do that. It's been said that it's fully costed. Well, no, it's not. Hugh says it can be a one-off, but to gain that back next year, just to get back to the position that we are in now, would mean we would have to raise council tax by 2.75%, plus whatever extra we may need in the budgets going forward for years to come. If you're living in a Band D house, and I think my colleagues have shown that they understand the budget and have explained how the budget works. Our majority of people are in Band B. But if you're in a Band D, which everyone wants to compare with, because that's the letter that they decided to compare, gaining £45.65 a year. If you're living in a Band G house, you're gaining £76.08 a year. So the wealthier you are, the more you gain. And the lowest paid will get nothing. Who costed it? Where's the evidence? Is it prudent? Is it sustainable? Well, I can answer that. No, it's not. 10,000 of our most vulnerable residents, lowest paid residents, get 100% reduction under the CTRS scheme. And another 7,000 get 50%. If we lower council tax, these people will not see any benefit at all. These are the people who are deciding whether they eat or heat. So, what are the opposition going to tell their lowest paid residents in Britain Ferry, Cymer, Aberavon, Coed Frank West, Glencorrwg, Crynant, Seven Sisters, Palenna, Gwynfi, Cymer, Neath, Rhys-Olwen, Cymle, Godregraig, Blaengrach, Neath South, Bryn Coch North, Bryn Coch South, Cwm Llynfell, Yslafera, Trebanos, Pontardawy and Rose. Because we, as a Labour Council, as Labour councillors, can tell them we have proposed a hardship fund to help those who are struggling with the cost of living crisis, while both Plaid Cymru and the independent parties, if they all vote for this, are proposing to give tax cuts that benefit mainly the richest people in the borough. They cannot be trusted with the borough's finances because they simply do not understand them, or they choose not to in order to gain popularity. We Labour councillors have a proven track record that we can be trusted to make the hard decisions that are sometimes unpopular because we believe it's the right thing to do. The opposition parties can't be trusted with MPT's budget because they're well aware that the majority of MP residents are at a Band B level, but because that's inconvenient for their argument, they choose to ignore it. It suits them to ignore it because they think it'll win them votes. But even though we have frozen council tax and set up a hardship fund for the lowest paid, that will hopefully make a big difference to those people, to help those who are struggling with this cost of living crisis, to be able to both heat and eat. All the while, the opposition are proposing tax cuts for the richest. They pretend it's because they care about the people who are worse off in MPT, but what they're actually doing is year on year creating a false narrative that benefits the have, not the have-nots. These are not the values that we in Labour Party hold dear to us. Our priorities help those who need us the most through the cost of living crisis. That's what we have done. That's what we are doing. And that is what we will continue to do, whatever the outcome of the election in May. They want to lower council tax at a time when we know that we will not be getting a settlement like this again for the foreseeable future. They want to lower council tax when a cross-party decision has just been made to take our leisure contract back in-house. When we are still recovering from COVID, they want to lower council tax. With the cost of living crisis ongoing and the inflation rate currently standing at 5.4% and predicted to go up to around 8%, they want to cut council tax. With the rise in fuel and energy costs going through the roof, they want to cut council tax. And with the uncertainty of the world's economy due to the despicable invasion of the Ukraine, they want to cut council tax. Councillor Purcell has stated budgetary uncertainty. Our pay, costs, fuel, utility costs are going to increase our budget by goodness how much. Which argument is she trying to prove? Because I think it's ours. Councillor Scott Jones said everyone will benefit from a cut in council tax, apart from those who have CTRS. Councillor Jones, there's 17,000 people. He says he's worked with Hugh and believe it is affordable, but Hugh has said that he cannot recommend it. I don't know how many years I've heard Councillor Stephen Hunt say how wonderful he thought Howell was, and people are saying how wonderful Hugh is, yet they consistently go against his recommendations. Councillor Hunt, Nigel Hunt, said that he'd worked with Hugh, but Hugh has repeatedly said he would not recommend it. Councillor Hunt mentioned the rising council tax across the last 5 years. It has risen less than 6% less than all Wales over the last 5 years, and that's without this year's freeze. There's too many unknowns last year. This behaviour is reckless. It's politics. It proves that they cannot be trusted to make competent decisions that will sometimes need to be made. But they never want to cut any services. They never want the price of anything to go up. Plaid Cymru couldn't even bring themselves to vote for our Welsh language policy. The opposition need to go and make a film on how they propose to manage our budget and call it Mission Impossible. I recommend that members support this budget.
Diolch yn fawr. Colleagues, we're ready to go to the formal process of voting on the amendment. The amendment has been formally put and seconded. I hand over to Democratic Services, please.
Thank you very much then, Deputy Mayor. So I'll be taking us through the process of dealing with this amendment today, members. So the first step of the process is for the member to propose an amendment. So Councillor Llewellyn, I come to you to confirm that you are proposing an amendment, and rather than read out the amendment, I'm just content for you to confirm it is the amendment that was issued to all members this morning, confirming a 2.75% reduction in council tax.
Yes, thank you very much to Craig. Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'd like to propose the amendment, the affordable and costed amendment of reducing the council tax in Neath Talbot by 2.75%.
Thank you very much, Councillor Llewellyn. And could I have a seconder to that motion, please?
Yeah, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'm happy to second that motion. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, sorry, Craig, to interrupt you. Could I ask at this stage, before you take the vote, for a recorded vote, please?
Ask that, yes.
Thank you.
I'll permit that, thank you.
Of course I can. Thank you very much, Councillor Hunt. So obviously there's been a request now for a recorded vote. So to request a recorded vote, it requires 10 members to agree. Could I ask, therefore, any members who wish the recorded vote to raise their electronic hands at this time, please? That's great. We've got the 10, so that's no problem at all. Everyone can go with their hands now at that point. So we've got the 10. So in light of that, we would now then move to the vote. So Jane Woodman-Ralph will call out your names, and I would be grateful if you could confirm you are voting for, against, or abstaining from the amendment. And I'll hand over to Jane.
Thank you. Councillor Angharad Aubrey.
Against.
Councillor Scott Bamsey.
Voting for the amendment.
Councillor Dean Causey.
Against.
Councillor Helen Clark.
For.
Councillor Cara Clement Williams.
Against.
Councillor Matthew Crowley. Councillor Matthew Crowley.
He's had to leave, Jane.
Matthew was left to go to the funeral that you mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, Jane.
Thank you. Councillor Stephanie Lynch.
Against.
Councillor Arthur Davis.
Against.
Councillor Nicola Davis.
For, Jane.
Councillor Oliver Davis.
Against.
Councillor Ros Davis.
For. Obliged.
Councillor Caroline Edwards.
For the amendment.
Councillor Jamie Evans.
Obliged. For.
Councillor Sharon Freegard.
Against.
Councillor Charlotte Galsworthy.
Against.
Councillor Wyndham Griffiths.
For the amendment.
Councillor Joe Hale.
For the amendment.
Councillor Sian Harris.
For, please.
Councillor Mike Harvey.
Against, Jane.
Councillor Nigel Hunt.
Obliged, Jane, for.
Councillor Steve Hunt.
For, Jane.
Councillor Jeremy Hurley.
For, thank you.
Councillor Chris James.
Voting for the amendment.
Councillor Hugh James.
Against, Jane.
Councillor Chris Jones.
Against, Jane.
Councillor Doreen Jones.
Against, Jane.
Councillor Hugh Jones.
For, Jane.
Councillor Jane Jones.
For, Jane.
Councillor Leanne Jones.
Against, Jane.
Councillor Rob Jones.
Against.
Councillor Scott Jones.
For, Jane.
Councillor Dennis Keogh.
Against.
Councillor Simon Noyle.
I am for the amendment, please, Jane. Thanks.
Councillor Ted Latham.
Against, Jane.
Councillor Dean Lewis.
Absolutely for the amendment, Jane. Thank you very much.
Councillor Alan Llewellyn. Councillor Llewellyn.
So I was going to obliged for the amendment.
Councillor Alan Lockyer.
Against, Jane.
Just to confirm, Councillor Adam McGrath is still not here. Councillor John Miller.
Against.
Councillor Sandra Miller.
Against, Jane.
Councillor Ridgeon Mason has left the meeting. Councillor Del Morgan.
From the chair, I abstain.
Councillor Suzanne Paddison.
Against.
Councillor Sheila Penry.
Against, Jane.
Councillor Martin Peters has left the meeting, and Councillor Rebecca Phillips has left the meeting. Councillor Mark Prothero.
I'm against. Thank you, Jane.
Councillor Annette Purcell. Councillor
For the
Purcell.
for the motion.
Councillor Sean Percy.
Against.
Councillor Saifra Harman.
Against.
Councillor Peter Rees.
Against the motion.
Councillor Suzanne Renkes.
Against.
Councillor Sonia Reynolds.
Against.
Councillor Anthony Richards.
Obliged for.
Councillor Peter Richards.
Against, Jane.
Councillor Marcia Spooner.
Obliged for.
Councillor Anthony Taylor.
Against.
Councillor Rachel Taylor.
Against.
Councillor Warman is not present. Councillor David Whitelock.
Against, Jane.
Councillor Chris Williams.
For the amendment, Jane.
Councillor Annette Wingrave.
Against.
Councillor Rob Wood.
Against.
Councillor Alwyl Wooncock.
An Erbyn against.
Thank you. If you could just give us a few minutes now just to add the figures up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, members, for bearing with us then. So we had 58 members ultimately who had been voting at this time. The number of votes in favour of the amendment to 23. The number of votes against the amendment to 34, with 1 abstention. So accordingly, I would confirm that that amendment has now failed in that regard. So in light of that, we now turn back to our papers and we look at the substantive motion, which is included on page 194 and 195 of your papers. Could I ask for a proposer for that recommendation, please?
I propose, Craig.
And could I have a seconder?
I second.
Thank you very much. So again, this time we go through the same process with a recorded vote. If members are happy for that. So again, Jane Woodman-Ralph. Oh, Councillor Llewellyn, sorry, I saw your hand raised at that point.
Yeah. Sorry, Craig. It was to request a recorded vote, but you put that in your preamble anyway. So
absolutely fine. That's no problem. We pick that up into the same one before we do go on. So again, Jane Woodman, Ralph will call out your names. We'd ask you to confirm whether you are for the recommendation, which is included in your papers, against the recommendation, or whether you wish to abstain. And again, we'll confirm the results to you then following the calculation.
Thank you. Councillor Aubrey.
For.
Councillor Sean Bamsey.
Against.
Councillor Dean Causey.
For.
Councillor Helen Clark.
Against.
Councillor Cara Clement Williams.
For.
Councillor Stephanie Lynch.
For.
Councillor Arthur Davis.
For.
Councillor Nicola Davis.
Against.
Councillor Oliver Davis.
For.
Councillor Ros Davis.
An erbyn.
Against, is that Councillor Davis?
Yeah, against.
Councillor Caroline Edwards.
Against.
Councillor Jamie Evans.
An erbyn. Against.
Councillor Sharon Freegard.
For.
Councillor Charlotte Gosworthy.
For.
Councillor Wyndham Griffiths.
Against.
Councillor Joe Hale.
Against.
Councillor Sian Harris.
Against.
Councillor Mike Harvey.
For Jane.
Councillor Nigel Hunt. Councillor Nigel Hunt.
And has been against Jane.
Thank you. Councillor Steve Hunt.
Against, Jane.
Councillor Jeremy Hurley.
Against, thank you.
Councillor Chris James.
Against, Jane.
Councillor Hugh James.
For Jane.
Councillor Chris Jones.
For Jane.
Councillor Doreen Jones.
For Jane. For Jane.
Thank you. Councillor Hugh Jones.
Erbyn. Against.
Councillor Jane Jones.
Against.
Councillor Leanne Jones.
For.
Councillor Rob Jones.
For.
Councillor Scott Jones.
Against, Jane.
Councillor Dennis Kehoe.
For Jane.
Councillor Simon Noyle.
I am against. Thanks, Jane.
Councillor Ted Latham.
Absolutely for.
Councillor Dean Lewis.
Absolutely against.
Councillor Alan Llewellyn.
An erbyn, Jane, diolch, against.
Councillor Alan Lockyer.
For Jane.
Councillor John Miller.
For.
Councillor Sandra Miller.
For.
Councillor Vivian Maisen.
He's gone.
Sorry, he's left. Councillor Del Morgan.
Atal Bleidlais, abstain.
Councillor Suzanne Paddison.
For.
Councillor Sheila Penry.
For Jane.
Martin Peters has left. Councillor Rebecca Phillips. She's left as well. Councillor Mark Prothero.
I'm for. Thank you, Jane.
Councillor Annette Purcell.
Against.
Councillor Sean Percy.
For.
Councillor Saifra Harman.
For Jane.
Councillor Peter Rees.
For Jane.
Councillor Suzanne Renkes.
For.
Councillor Sonia Reynolds.
For.
Councillor Anthony Richards.
An erbyn. Against.
Councillor Peter Richards.
For.
Councillor Marcia Spooner.
An erbyn. Against.
Councillor Anthony Taylor.
For.
Councillor Rachel Taylor.
For.
Councillor John Warman is not present. Councillor David Whitelock.
For, thank you, Jane.
Councillor Chris Williams.
Against, Jane.
Councillor Annette Wingrave.
For Jane.
Councillor Rob Wood.
For Jane.
Councillor Alwyn Woolcock.
Obliged for.
If you could just give us 5 minutes for us just to collate that.
Thank you very much, members, for bearing with us then. So I confirm that the number of votes in favour is 34, the number of votes against 23, with 1 abstention. Therefore, that recommendation is now passed and brings to an end this item of business. And Mr Deputy Mayor, you can move on to the next item.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Craig. Thank you, members. Item 6, Council Tax 2022-2023. So I'll call once again upon Councillor Carol Clement-Williams, Cabinet Member for Finance, to introduce this report.
You're on mute, Councillor Clement-Williams.
It had to happen, didn't it, eventually? Oh, thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, Leader and members of Council. Following on from the proposal agreed as part of the previous item, this report is now the technical document which sets out council tax values across all bands and parishes within the county borough. The report and the various tables are a requirement of the 1992 Local Government Finance Act, and I commend the recommendations to Council.
Diolch yn fawr. Members, are there any questions or comments? Please raise your electronic hand or indicate via the chat function. I'll call upon you in turn.
I can see no indications for questions, Deputy Mayor.
Okay, thank you. So I now refer Council to the recommendations on pages 242 and 243 of the circulated report. Could I please have a proposer and seconder?
I propose, Mr Mayor.
Second, Mr Mayor.
Council, if you do not indicate to the contrary by raising your electronic hand, it will be assumed that you are in favour of the recommendations.
I can see no indications to the contrary, Deputy Mayor, so that item has been approved.
Thanks, Jane. On to agenda item 7, the Capital Strategy and Capital Programme 2022-2023 to 2024-2025. Once again, I call upon Councillor Carol Clement-Williams, Cabinet Member for Finance, to introduce this report.
Mr Mayor, Leader and members of Council. This report in front of Council today sets out our capital strategy and capital programme for the next 3 years. The report sets out an ambitious capital spending strategy worth more than £140 million over the next 3 years to give the local economy a major boost as it starts recovering from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Major investment initiatives included in the spending programme include an 11 million new primary school in Longford to replace the current 3 separate sites of Abbey Primary School. Completion of the new shopping, leisure and swimming pool complex in Neath Town Centre. The complex will also contain a brand new library and is situated in the centre of the town, so will bring much needed footfall to the town centre. The programme also contains details of an ambitious set of City Deal projects which will transform the local economy. Mr Mayor, this council places great emphasis on the importance of capital investment as a means of regenerating our communities and providing modern and safe buildings and infrastructure. This programme builds on those ambitions. Mr Mayor, I commend the recommendation to Council.
Diolch. Members, are there any questions or comments relating to this item? Please raise your electronic hand or indicate via the chat function and I'll call upon you in turn.
I can see no indications of questions, Deputy Mayor.
Okay, thanks. I now refer members to the recommendations on page 259 of the circulated report. Can I please have a proposer and seconder?
I propose, Mr Mayor.
And second, Mr Mayor.
Council, if you do not indicate to the contrary by raising your electronic hand, it will be assumed that you are in favour of the recommendations.
I can see no indications to the contrary, Deputy Mayor, so that item has been approved.
Diolch yn fawr. On to agenda item 8, Treasury Management Strategy, Annual Investment Strategy and Minimum Revenue Provision Policy. I call upon Hugh Jones, the Chief Finance Officer, to introduce this report. Hugh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. This report in front of Council today, as you said, is the Treasury Management Strategy, Annual Investment Strategy and Minimum Revenue Provision Policy for 2022-23. It's an important document as it sets out the governance arrangements in relation to the Council's Treasury management activity. It's in line with previous policy, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and the recommendations are set out on page 287 of the report, and I'm happy to take any questions members of Council may have. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Diolch, Hugh. Members, are there any questions or comments? Please raise your electronic hand or indicate via the chat function, and I'll call upon you in turn if there are.
Mr. Mayor, there is...
I can see one hand, so Councillor Nigel Hunt, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hugh, I'd just like to find out really, so we borrow and we lend, is that right? And secondly, how much costs do we incur on borrowing and how much do we borrow every year?
That's correct, yes. We borrow to fund our capital programme and we invest any surplus cash we have with various counterparties as set out. Our total borrowing at the moment as a council stands at around, if I quickly look, around £300 million, which is an accumulated amount of borrowing from pre-local government reorganisation and borrowing this council has undertaken. And our investments are around £60 million in various institutions at the moment. The total cost of borrowing is included within the revenue budget and is around £19 million per annum in terms of repaying both principal and interest on all the loans that we have at the moment. Is that okay, Councillor Hunt?
Yeah, that's fine. How much did we borrow last year?
Last year we borrowed £10 million at a rate of 1.37%, which was an all-time low borrowing rate.
So we'll pay like £137,000 a year interest on that annually going forward.
That's right, yes. And obviously you've got to pay the 10 million principal back as well in the same way you pay back.
Yeah. So why did we feel the need to borrow such a large amount then? And because £137,000 is a lot more than we pay on air quality or monitoring. That's quite a significant amount, right? £137,000.
Yeah, we need to borrow to support the capital programme. So within the funding we get from the Welsh Government, they fund us through the revenue support grant to cover those borrowing costs.
Okay,
as you say, it's,
okay, thanks, Hugh.
Thank you. Councillor Carol Clement-Williams, you have your hand up.
Yeah, borrowing to finance capital spend is the normal way that government, Westminster, Welsh Government, and every council in Wales and probably the UK fund capital projects. As I said in my previous summing up, some members don't seem to understand how council budget works. I was wondering if you can arrange, well, it might as well be May now, for an all-member seminar so members understand how capital budgets work, how revenue budgets work, how if you lower council tax it has repercussions for years to come. Because obviously, judging by some of the questions and some of the comments that have come forward today, members don't understand council's budgets. Thank you.
Sure that you will take on board requests constantly for seminars and training. I don't think any member understands 100% how the budget works, including myself. I don't see any other hands. So I'm going to refer members, please, to the recommendations on page 287 of the circulated report. Can I have a proposer and a seconder?
I move, Mr. Mayor.
A second, Mr Mayor.
Diolch, Council. If you don't indicate to the contrary by raising your electronic hand, it will be assumed that you are in favour of the recommendation.
I can see no hands raised to the contrary, Deputy Mayor, so that item has been approved.
Diolch, Shane. Agenda item 9, Capital Budget Monitoring 2021-2022. Again, I call upon Hugh Jones, Chief Finance Officer, to introduce this report.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. This report sets out the position in terms of the delivery of the Council's capital programme as at the end of December 2021. Members will note that £48 million had been spent at that point in time in delivering the capital programme, which represents around 60% of the programme, which when you take the fact that there's a delay between actually delivering the work and paying for the actual work, it's on target. So yes, an update for members, and the recommendations on page 298, Mr Deputy Mayor. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, Hugh. Members, again, if there are any questions or comments, please raise electronic hands or indicate via the chat function. I'll call upon you.
I can see no hands raised, Deputy Mayor, as there's no questions.
Diolch. So referring members to the recommendations on page 298 and 299 of the circulatory report, please can I have a proposer and a seconder?
I move, Mr Mayor.
A second, Mr Mayor.
I see no hands in opposition. Therefore, I take that as being accepted. And now please move on to agenda item 10, notice of motion. You'll be pleased to hear I have received no notice of motion for today's meeting. Agenda item 11, questions from members under Rule 9.2. I've received no questions from members under Rule 9.2 either. So agenda item 12 is urgent items. I have none. So thank you all so much for attending. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi gyd. That ends the business for today's meeting. So please enjoy the remainder of St David's Day. Mwynhewch dydd Gwyl Dewi a gwnewch y pethau bychain. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank